Hello there and welcome. Tonight, we're diving into something truly remarkable that's happening inside your skull right now, in this very moment. Your brain isn't simply reacting to the world as it comes. It's already figured out what's going to happen before it happens. Your conscious awareness arrives late to almost everything. By the time you feel like you've made a choice, decided to move your hand, or recognized a face in a crowd, your brain has already done the heavy lifting. It's been predicting, calculating, and preparing for seconds or even minutes before you become aware of it. This isn't speculation or philosophy. This is neuroscience. Researchers using brain imaging and machine learning have demonstrated that they can predict your decisions before you consciously make them. They can see the neural activity that precedes your awareness by considerable margins. Some predictions happen in milliseconds, others span several seconds. The timeline varies depending on what you're trying to do, but the fundamental pattern remains consistent. Your brain is always ahead of your conscious mind, preparing responses, shaping perception, and guiding behavior through pathways you cannot access directly. If you enjoy exploring these mysteries of the mind, please like, subscribe, or share this with someone curious about how the brain truly works. For now, let's settle into this investigation together. Let your mind ease into these ideas, and let the strange architecture of prediction become clear. Your visual cortex is constantly generating expectations about what it's about to see. Before light even hits your retina in a particular pattern, your brain has already assembled a prediction about the visual world. This is not passive reception. This is active construction. When you look at a scene, your visual system doesn't wait for the pixels to arrive and then slowly build an image. Instead, it sends predictions downward from higher visual areas to lower visual areas, creating a template of what should appear. When actual visual input arrives, it doesn't travel upward in a simple chain. Instead, it encounters these predictions. The match between prediction and reality is processed differently than the mismatch. The brain essentially cancels out what it expected and focuses all its attention on what surprised it. Your consciousness only receives information about the prediction errors, the violations of expectancy. Consider a photograph you've seen many times. Your visual cortex predicts the arrangement of colors, shapes, and spatial relationships so accurately that when you glance at it again, you perceive it almost instantaneously. But show that same person something unexpected in that photograph, a subtle change they've never seen before, and suddenly their conscious attention snaps to it like a spotlight. The visual system has detected the mismatch. Vision researchers have discovered that the state of visual cortex, even before a stimulus appears, influences how that stimulus will be perceived. Brain activity in the visual cortex correlates with what people will see before the visual input ever arrives. This predictive shaping of perception happens in early visual areas, not just in higher cognitive regions. The brain is fundamentally organized to predict. Higher levels of the visual hierarchy send feedback signals downward, carrying expectations that shape how lower levels process incoming information. These predict. Ions are based on your past experience, on patterns your brain has learned over a lifetime. When you learn to read, your visual system develops strong predictions about letter sequences and word shapes. This is why you can read a sentence with multiple letters missing and still understand it perfectly. Your visual cortex predicts the letters that should be there. When those predictions prove accurate, you barely notice the words. But when a word is misspelled, when the prediction fails, your conscious attention catches it immediately. The visual system is optimized not to show you everything, but to show you what violates your expectations. Depth perception works through prediction too. Your brain doesn't calculate 3 dimensions through some slow mathematical process each time you look at something. Instead, it generates predictions based on cues like perspective, occlusion, and motion. It predicts depth before you see it, and when reality confirms those predictions, perception feels immediate and effortless. Lighting, shadow, color, all these visual properties are predicted before they're fully perceived. Your visual cortex generates predictions about illumination conditions. It predicts how an object should reflect light given the light source and surface properties. When visual input matches these predictions, you perceive the true color of the object even if the light changes. This is why a white shirt looks white in sunlight and indoors, even though the light reflecting from it is physically different. Your brain has predicted the illumination and corrected for it before conscious perception forms. Scene perception follows the same predictive logic. When you enter a room, your visual cortex predicts what furnishings, walls, and objects should be present based on the room type. A kitchen evo casts predictions of appliances and counters. A bedroom evokes predictions of beds and nightstands. These predictions begin forming immediately, even before your eyes have fully scanned the room. The predictions guide where your eyes move. You look at predictable locations first. Only when your eyes find something unexpected do they linger and study the surprising element. This predictive guidance of visual attention makes perception efficient. You don't need to examine every detail because your brain predicts most of what should be there. Motion is one of the most predictively generated experiences in your visual world. When you watch a moving object, you don't track its current position. You track where your brain predicts it will be. Neuroscientists have found that visual areas representing motion actually activate for the predicted future location of an object rather than its current location. When you catch a ball, your hand doesn't move to where the ball currently is. It moves to where the ball will be. This requires prediction. Your motor system uses visual predictions to time the movement perfectly. The brain is constantly running forward simulations, imagining where moving objects will be in the next moment, then positioning the body to intercept them. Think about driving on a highway. You're not responding to the current positions of other cars. You're predicting their future trajectories and adjusting your speed and steering accordingly. If another driver swerves unexpectedly, your brain has to generate a new prediction rapidly. This takes conscious attention because the situation violated your predictions. In predictable traffic, driving feels almost automatic. Your brain handles the prediction without conscious awareness. Athletes in sports like tennis or baseball have developed extraordinary predictive abilities through practice. A tennis player's brain learns to predict where the incoming ball will be, based on the opponent's movement patterns and racket angle. This prediction happens before the ball is hit. That's how professional players can return serves at speeds that seem physically impossible if they were reacting in real time. They're not reacting, they're predicting. The brain's predictive system for motion is so powerful that it can anticipate trajectories and intercept moving objects with remarkable precision, demonstrating how deeply embedded prediction is in even the most rapid motor responses. The predictive system learns from repeated patterns. Magicians exploit predictive systems brilliantly. They create situations where your brain makes strong predictions, then violate those predictions with hidden movements. Your conscious attention follows the predicted motion, so you miss the actual movement happening elsewhere. Your brain predicted a card would move in a certain direction based on the magician's body language, and your attention followed that prediction. The sleight of hand happened outside your predicted area. When you watch a video and anticipate someone's action, you're experiencing prediction. Your brain has learned typical patterns of behavior from previous experience. Someone reaches for a cup, and your visual system predicts the hand will grasp it. If the person suddenly stops, the prediction error creates a conscious noticing. Skilled watchers, like coaches analyzing athletes, have refined predictions about body movement. They see subtle signs and predict what action will follow. Their predictions are often accurate because they've developed models of human movement through extensive observation. This is why expertise feels different from novice observation. The expert's brain generates more accurate predictions, so they consciously experience less surprise. Your sensory systems work through a fundamental principle. The brain generates predictions about incoming sensory information from higher levels and compares these predictions with actual bottom-up sensory signals. This comparison is where learning happens. This is where perception forms. In the auditory system, your brain predicts the sounds it expects before they arrive. A dog owner's brain predicts the sound of their dog before they see the dog. That prediction can sometimes create the experience of hearing the dog when it's not actually there. This is called predictive perception. The brain is so confident in its prediction that it generates the conscious experience even in the absence of the actual stimulus. Neurons in auditory cortex show activity patterns that match incoming sounds, but also activity patterns that match predictions about what sounds should be coming. These predictive neural responses can occur before the sound actually arrives, shaping how the brain will process it when it does come. In familiar environments like your home, background sounds are predicted so strongly that you barely notice them. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of a clock, the ambient traffic noise, these are predicted and filtered out. Only when these expected sounds change, when the refrigerator stops running unexpectedly, does consciousness snap to attention. In the somatosensory system, your brain predicts how your body will feel. When you touch something rough, your brain doesn't just passively register roughness. It predicts the sensation based on visual information about the object, past experience with similar textures, and the recent context. The predictive system combines all this information to generate your experience of the texture. Touch is shaped by prediction just as much as vision. Your brain predicts pressure, temperature, and texture before you fully perceive them. Researchers have found that if you move your hand to touch something, your brain predicts what sensation will occur based on the visual appearance of the object. When the prediction matches the actual sensation, there's no conscious surprise. But if your hand touches something unexpected, if the texture is different from what you predicted, that prediction error creates conscious surprise. In the olfactory system, your brain predicts what you'll smell. The expectation that a kitchen contains the smell of cooking food influences how strongly you perceive that smell. If you expect a room to smell unpleasant, your brain's prediction system amplifies the unpleasant smell and suppresses other olfactory information. Taste is similarly predictive. A familiar food tastes the way you predict it will taste, based on visual appearance, smell, and past experience. This is why food tastes different when the lighting is changed or the appearance is altered. Your brain's prediction about what the food should taste like has been disrupted. The brain coordinates predictions across all sensory systems. When you watch someone speak, your auditory system predicts what words they'll say based on visual information about their mouth movements. This prediction combines with the actual sound to create your perception of speech. If the audio and visual information don't match, if the lips say one thing while the sound says another, your brain detects this prediction error and reports confusion or discomfort. All sensory prediction relies on learned models of the world. These models develop through experience. A child who hasn't yet learned the typical patterns of speech will have different predictions than an experienced listener. An experienced listener's brain automatically predicts the next words in a conversation, the next musical notes in a song, the next visual elements in a familiar scene. The predictive brain learns from every interaction with the environment, constantly updating its models of what sensations to expect. Surprise occurs when reality violates prediction. That moment when something unexpected happens, that jolt of consciousness, that's a prediction error being consciously processed. The brain's response to surprise is rapid and automatic. When you anticipate something will happen and it doesn't, or when something happens that you didn't anticipate, your brain immediately generates an error signal. This error signal is one of the most fundamental learning mechanisms in neuroscience. Every time your prediction is wrong, your brain has an opportunity to refine its model of the world. Researchers have found that the subjective intensity of surprise depends on the magnitude of the prediction error. A small deviation from expectation creates intense surprise. Your brain compares how wrong it was and scales the conscious feeling accordingly. When you hear a loud noise in a quiet environment, the surprise is intense because your prediction was very different from reality. In a noisy environment, a loud noise creates minimal surprise because your brain predicted loud sounds. The same acoustic stimulus produces different levels of conscious surprise depending on what your brain predicted. Prediction errors drive learning more powerfully than correct predictions. Your brain learns very little from situations where everything goes as expected, but when expectations are violated, the brain enters a learning state. It updates its models, strengthens certain neural connections, and weakens others. This is the mechanism behind almost all learning. A golfer learns through prediction error. They predict where the ball will land, take the shot, see where it actually lands, and use that error to adjust their prediction model for the next shot. Learning means updating predictions through accumulated error signals. In emotion and memory, prediction errors have enormous power. An unexpected emotional event is remembered far better than an expected one. Your brain marks prediction errors as important. This makes sense evolutionarily. Events that violate your expectations about the world are likely to be important for survival and should be remembered vividly. Trauma works through this mechanism. Traumatic events are deeply encoded in memory because they violate fundamental predictions about safety and predictability. Your brain is trying so hard to build accurate models that unexpected danger creates powerful, lasting memories. Surprise can be positive or negative. The joy of a surprise party comes from prediction error. Your brain predicted you'd spend the evening alone, then is surprised to find many people gathered for you. The magnitude of the prediction error determines the intensity of joy. When a musician plays an unexpected chord, the prediction error creates interest and engagement. Predictable music feels boring because there's no prediction error. Complex music that violates predictions in interesting ways engages conscious attention and creates the experience of surprise and delight. Social predictions generate many prediction errors. When someone acts unexpectedly, your brain has a moment of confusion before updating its model of that person. This is why betrayal feels so intensely painful. You had a strong prediction about someone's behavior. They violate that prediction dramatically. The brain generates a large prediction error that registers as conscious emotional pain. Benjamin Libet was a neurologist in the early 1980s who became fascinated by a fundamental question about consciousness and will. He wanted to know when decisions actually form. Do we consciously make decisions and then execute them, or does something else happen? Libet designed an elegant experiment. He had subjects sit in front of a clock with a rapidly rotating dot. The subjects were instructed to flex their finger whenever they felt like it, and they were asked to note the position of the rotating dot at the moment they became consciously aware of their decision to flex. Simultaneously, Libet measured their brain activity using EEG, recording electrical signals from the scalp. This allowed him to measure when the brain began preparing to move. Libet was looking for a neural signal that preceded the conscious decision. He called this signal the readiness potential. It was a slow, negative-going electrical shift that appeared over motor cortex before movement. What Libet discovered was remarkable. The readiness potential appeared about 350 milliseconds before the conscious decision to move. But even more striking, the earliest phases of the readiness potential appeared about 1.5 seconds before conscious awareness. The brain began preparing for movement long before the conscious mind decided to move. The implications were startling. If the brain began preparing to move 1.5 seconds before the person consciously decided to move, what role does consciousness play in voluntary action? Libet's own subjects reported that they fell, yet they had freely decided when to flex their finger. Yet the brain had begun preparing the movement well before they became aware of any decision. Libet interpreted his findings as showing that consciousness does not initiate action. Instead, the brain unconsciously initiates the action, and consciousness arrives after the fact, providing a narrative about what happened and why. This interpretation suggested that free will might be an illusion, that we're conscious observers of decisions our unconscious brain has already made. Modern researchers have replicated and extended Libet's findings using more sophisticated techniques. Machine learning researchers have shown they can predict whether someone will push a button or pull a lever about 7 to 11 seconds before the person reports consciously deciding to do so. By analyzing patterns of brain activity in frontal and parietal regions, they can forecast which choice someone will make with better than chance accuracy. These predictions worked because the brain had already begun accumulating evidence toward a decision well before consciousness arrived. The readiness potential Libet discovered appears to be just one aspect of a much longer decision preparation process. Early brain activity in regions like the anterior frontopolar cortex, which is involved in abstract thinking and planning, shows decision-related information before this activity reaches consciousness. The brain is making plans, generating options, and evaluating possibilities for seconds before you become aware you're making a choice. This discovery challenged traditional assumptions about conscious will and voluntary action. If the brain initiates decisions before consciousness, what role does consciousness play? Libet suggested that consciousness might have a veto function. Even if the brain has begun preparing an action, consciousness might have a brief window, about 200 milliseconds, to stop the action before it occurs. This preserves some role for conscious will. Rather than initiating action, consciousness might inhibit unwanted actions. This interpretation is still debated, but it suggests consciousness isn't entirely epiphenomenal. It's not merely a passive observer. It retains some capacity to influence outcomes through inhibition. The readiness potential discoveries sparked intense philosophical debate about free will and determinism. If the brain predicts and initiates your decisions before you're aware of them, do you actually have free will? Some neuroscientists interpreted Libet's findings as evidence that free will is an illusion. Your sense of agency, your feeling that you're making choices, might be something your brain creates after the fact. The conscious narrative you tell yourself about your decision might be generated after the actual neural processes that determine the decision have already unfolded. However, subsequent research has challenged and complicated Libet's interpretations. Some studies found that the readiness potential Libet measured might not be as directly related to conscious intention as he believed. The timing relationship between different neural signals and conscious awareness appears more complex than originally thought. Different labs have reported varying results when they try to replicate Libet's temporal findings. Some researchers argue that consciousness might arise earlier in the decision process than Libet suggested. They argue that the very neural activity Libet measured as unconscious might already include conscious processes. Consciousness might not be a single moment when awareness suddenly appears. It might be a gradual process that unfolds over time. What seems clear is that decision-making involves both conscious and unconscious processes operating simultaneously. The brain doesn't cleanly separate conscious and unconscious processing. Instead, multiple neural systems contribute to decisions, some conscious and some not. The relationship between these systems remains one of neuroscience's deepest puzzles. The frontopolar cortex, the most anterior region of prefrontal cortex, appears to play a special role in abstract decision-making and seems to carry decision-related information before consciousness. Activity patterns in this region can predict future choices. But what determines this activity pattern? Is it conscious or unconscious? Researchers simply don't know yet. What Libet's discovery made clear is that consciousness is not the primary initiator of action. The brain generates action through vast unconscious processes. Consciousness seems to be involved more in monitoring, interpreting, and learning from action than in initiating it. This doesn't mean consciousness is useless or epiphenomenal. It means consciousness plays different roles than we typically think. Your brain divides time into intervals and uses prediction to guide behavior across timescales. Some decisions need to be made in milliseconds, others unfold over hours or days. The brain has predictive mechanisms operating at all these timescales. One of the most striking discoveries in neuroscience is that certain neurons in the brain show activity patterns that ramp up gradually over time. These ramping activity patterns appear to encode the passage of time. They encode intervals. Dopamine neurons in regions like the medial frontal cortex show ramping activity that increases steadily while an animal waits for a reward. The rate of ramp encodes how long the animal expects to wait. When the reward arrives, the ramp stops. If the reward arrives earlier than expected, creating a positive prediction error, dopamine shows a burst. If the reward is late, dopamine shows a depression. Dopamine signaling doesn't just represent reward value. It represents deviation from predicted timing. This suggests the brain uses dopamine to track and update predictions about when events will occur. The ramping activity provides a neural clock that predicts intervals. Different timescales are represented in different neural systems. Very short intervals, milliseconds, might be encoded in the timing of spikes in neural activity. Longer intervals, seconds to minutes, are encoded in ramping activity and in slower fluctuations in neural populations. Even longer intervals, hours to days, might be encoded in the patterns of gene expression and neuromodulator levels. The brain appears to use multiple overlapping codes for time, each operating at different scales. These timing predictions guide motor actions. When you time an action to occur at a specific moment, your brain has generated a prediction about when that moment will arrive. Your motor system launches the action based on when your predictive clock predicts its time. Athletes use timing predictions constantly. A batter in baseball must predict when the ball will reach the strike zone so they can time their swing. A pianist must predict when to strike the next key so notes blend together smoothly. A driver must predict when to brake so the car stops at the right moment. All of these require neural timing predictions. When timing predictions fail, the action misfires. You swing too early or too late. You brake at the wrong moment. You miss the timing and the action fails. Timing predictions are learned through practice. Musicians practice to refine their timing predictions. Athletes train to develop accurate temporal predictions for their sport. These timing predictions become so automatic that expert performance feels effortless. Jazz musicians improvising together must have millisecond-level timing predictions that allow their actions to synchronize. They develop these predictions through years of playing together and learning each other's timing patterns. The brain is constantly predicting where you are in time, how much time remains in a task, and when the next event will occur. These temporal predictions structure your conscious experience. The sense that time flows smoothly depends on accurate timing predictions. When timing predictions are disrupted, time can feel distorted. During emergencies, time feels like it slows down. This might reflect disrupted timing predictions. The brain's usual predictive timing becomes uncertain, and consciousness processes events at a different rate than normal. Temporal prediction failures create the experience of surprise. When you expect something to happen at a certain time and it happens too early or too late, that timing error creates a conscious noticing. Language comprehension is almost entirely predictive. As you listen to someone speak or read words, your brain isn't processing each word in isolation. It's constantly predicting what word will come next based on the preceding context and on your knowledge of language. Neuroscientists have found that language areas in the brain show activity patterns that match predicted words before the words are actually heard or seen. Your brain has activated predictions about upcoming words before they arrive. The comprehension of language depends almost entirely on these predictions. When you hear an expected word in a familiar context, your brain processes it easily because the prediction was correct. When you hear an unexpected word, an unusual word choice, your conscious attention is captured because the prediction failed. Skilled readers have developed strong language predictions. They can read very quickly because their brain predicts words so accurately. The eyes don't need to process every letter of every word. The predictions are strong enough that the brain reconstructs the likely words from minimal visual input. This is why you can read a sentence with missing letters and still understand it perfectly. Your brain predicted the missing letters. When a writer uses unexpected word choices, prediction errors are generated. This creates interest and engagement. Predictable writing feels boring. Surprising word choices engage conscious attention. Poets and writers deliberately manipulate language to create prediction errors. They set up expectations through the beginning of a sentence, then violate those expectations with unexpected words or grammar. The prediction error creates aesthetic pleasure. Bilingual people's brains maintain separate language prediction systems. When a bilingual person hears language in one language, their brain activates predictions in that language system while suppressing the other language system. A language cue signals which language prediction system to use. The brain switches between systems based on context. People learning a new language are weak at language prediction in that language. They don't yet have strong models of typical word sequences and grammar patterns. This is why learning a new language is cognitively demanding. The brain has to consciously process each word rather than relying on automatic predictions. As learners develop language expertise, prediction becomes stronger. Processing becomes more automatic. Language becomes effortless. Speech perception involves joint prediction of both auditory and visual information. When you watch someone speak, your visual system predicts the sounds their mouth movements indicate. The auditory system receives the actual sounds. These two predictions are combined to create the perception of speech. When the visual and auditory information conflict, like in the McGurk effect, your brain detects the prediction error and reports the perceptually combined result. Different sensory predictions are integrated into a unified conscious experience. Linguistic prediction errors, when words don't match grammatical expectations or semantic patterns, are particularly engaging to consciousness. These violations hold your attention and require interpretation, making them central to how language creates meaning through surprise. Social perception is fundamentally predictive. When you interact with another person, your brain is constantly predicting what they will do and say next. These social predictions are based on the person's past behavior, their facial expressions, their body language, and the context of the interaction. Your brain builds models of other people. These models predict how those individuals will behave in different situations. A friend's personality is essentially your brain's predictive model of how that friend typically acts. When a friend behaves unexpectedly, your prediction fails and you become consciously aware of the surprise. You revise your model of the person based on the prediction error. Understanding other people means having accurate predictive models of them. Babies and young children develop these predictive models through observation and interaction. They learn that certain actions by others predict certain outcomes. A smile predicts a friendly interaction. A frown predicts a negative interaction. These social predictions develop early and become refined over a lifetime. Theory of mind, the ability to understand that other people have thoughts and beliefs, relies on prediction. You predict what someone believes based on what they've been exposed to. You predict what they want based on their behavior and expressions. You predict what they'll do based on your model of their personality and goals. Theory of mind failures occur when your predictions are dramatically wrong. Someone acts in a way completely contrary to your expectations. This creates a large prediction error that disrupts social understanding temporarily. People with autism spectrum conditions sometimes report difficulties with theory of mind. This might reflect differences in how social predictions are generated or how prediction errors are processed. Empathy involves predicting what someone feels. You observe their facial expression, body language, and the context. Your brain uses all this information to predict their emotional state. You activate neural systems that simulate that emotional state, and that simulation creates empathy. When someone's emotional expression matches your prediction, you smoothly empathize. When someone's emotional expression surprises you, you might report less empathy initially. You have to revise your prediction about what they feel before empathy flows. Deception works through manipulating social predictions. A liar tries to produce behavior that matches the predictions of honest people. They try to conceal behavior that would violate predictions of honest behavior. A person skilled at deception is skilled at manipulating social predictions. A person skilled at detecting deception has learned what prediction violations indicate falsehood. Body language cues, microexpressions, and vocal changes can create prediction errors that signal deception. Reputation is a summary of predictive information about a person. A person's reputation determines what others predict about them. A trustworthy reputation means people predict you'll behave honestly. An untrustworthy reputation means people predict you'll behave dishonestly. A single action that violates predictive behavior can change someone's entire reputation. The power of first impressions comes from prediction. You make a prediction about a person based on minimal information. That prediction shapes how you interpret their subsequent behavior. If your first impression was positive, you interpret ambiguous actions positively. If your first impression was negative, you interpret the same actions negatively. The prediction you formed initially shapes perception afterward. These social prediction models persist throughout relationships, continuously updated by new interactions and prediction errors that refine understanding of who people are. Optical illusions exist because your brain is making predictions that diverge from reality. When you look at an ambiguous image, something that can be perceived multiple ways, your brain is actually toggling between different predictive models. The famous Rubin vase, where you see either a vase or two faces depending on what your brain predicts, demonstrates this perfectly. Your visual system is not simply registering the actual pixels on the page. It's generating competing predictions about what the image contains. One prediction model says vase, another says faces. The same physical stimulus produces different conscious experiences depending on which predictive model is currently dominant. The Necker cube, a wireframe drawing of a cube, shifts between two different three-dimensional configurations. When you look at it, it spontaneously flips. What's happening is your visual cortex is alternating between two predictive models of how the three-dimensional space should be organized. Neither is correct because it's just a two-dimensional drawing. But your brain insists on interpreting it as three-dimensional, cycling through predictive interpretations. Motion illusions work through temporal prediction. When static images are arranged in sequence, your brain predicts motion and generates the conscious experience of movement. The actual images don't move, but your visual system predicts the path an object would follow between frames and generates a sense of motion. Magicians use motion illusions constantly. They arrange movements and timing, so your brain predicts motion in directions the actual motion isn't happening. Your visual system has been tricked by a prediction. Impossible figures, like Escher's drawings that seem to violate three-dimensional logic, create prediction errors that your conscious mind can't resolve. Your brain tries to build a three-dimensional model from the two-dimensional representation. But the relationships between elements violate what's physically possible. Your brain keeps trying different predictive models, and none of them fit. The result is a peculiar conscious experience where something feels wrong, but you can't quite identify what's wrong. Color illusions demonstrate that your brain is constantly predicting colors, and that these predictions can override actual sensory input. Surround colors influence perception. A gray square appears darker when surrounded by white, and lighter when surrounded by black. The surrounding area shapes what your visual cortex predicts the target square should be. The predictive system adjusts what it expects based on context. When the context changes, the prediction changes, and the perceived color changes, even though the actual light reflecting from the square hasn't changed. Contrast illusions work similarly. Your brain predicts that adjacent regions should have different properties. When two regions have similar brightness values, your brain enhances the difference in its prediction, making the regions appear more different than they actually are. This enhances edge detection and makes objects more distinguishable from background. The Mueller-Lyer illusion creates a prediction about depth. The arrowheads on the ends of lines create a sense of perspective. Your visual system predicts that one line is farther away than the other based on the perspective cues. That prediction about depth influences the predicti on about length. The line that appears farther away is predicted to be longer, so it appears longer even though both lines are the same physical length. Watercolor illusions involve predictions about color regions and transparency. Your brain predicts that colored outlines indicate color boundaries and predicts that regions should be filled with color related to the outline. The predictive system fills in color properties based on these predictions, even when the actual colored pixels don't support that prediction. The visual system uses boundary predictions to organize color, generating colors that aren't physically there. Brightness illusions also reveal prediction. A gray region appears brighter against a dark background than against a light background. Your visual system predicts what brightness values should be in different contexts. When you see a bright region next to a very dark region, your brain predicts that other nearby regions should follow a certain brightness gradient. A gray region that matches this prediction appears brighter than a gray region that violates the prediction. Apparent motion in static displays shows how thoroughly prediction dominates perception. The brain generates motion experiences from static stimuli. Dots arranged in a sequence elicit the perception of motion even when no motion is occurring. The brain is predicting where the dots will be next and generating that experience of motion. Rotating snakes, an illusion of rotating patterns created through subtle brightness variations, demonstrates motion prediction in complex patterns. Your brain predicts motion and generates the experience of smooth rotation. The actual image is completely static, but prediction creates movement. Audio illusions reveal that hearing operates through similar predictive mechanisms to vision. The brain predicts what sounds it will hear, and these predictions shape perception. The phoneme restoration effect demonstrates this dramatically. When a phoneme, a distinct speech sound, is replaced by static noise of equal loudness, people still perceive the phoneme. They hear a word as complete, even though the phoneme is physically absent from the signal. The brain fills in the missing sound based on prediction. The context of the sentence predicts what word is being spoken. The brain's speech prediction system is so confident in what word is coming that it generates the experience of hearing the complete word, even when part of it is missing. Shepherd tone illusions create the perception of an endlessly ascending pitch from a static repeating stimulus. The tone seems to climb higher and higher, but it never actually gets higher. The predictive system predicts that an ascending pattern will continue. The stimulus is designed so the prediction is never violated. The brain generates an ascending pitch experience indefinitely from a sound that doesn't actually change. Octave illusions involve binaural presentation, where different pitch information is delivered to each ear in alternating patterns. The brain predicts that a single continuous line of pitch change is occurring, but the actual stimulus violates that continuously. The brain resolves the ambiguity by predicting a coherent pitch pattern that doesn't match the actual physical stimulus. The conscious experience of pitch follows the brain's prediction rather than the actual acoustic information. The tritone paradox is an auditory illusion where different people perceive pitch as ascending or descending based on their phonological expectations. A sequence of tones that's actually ambiguous is perceived differently depending on what pitch direction the listener predicts based on their language or cultural background. The same acoustic stimulus produces opposite pitch direction perceptions depending on predictive expectations. Speech perception involves enormous amounts of prediction. The brain predicts what phonemes will occur based on the speech context. When listening to a foreign language, predictions are weak because the listener hasn't developed strong models of that language's phonotactic patterns. More prediction errors occur and comprehension becomes difficult. Native listeners have strong predictions based on years of exposure to language patterns. Prediction errors are minimal and comprehension feels effortless. The cocktail party effect shows prediction in social listening. When many conversations occur simultaneously, the brain predicts which conversation contains information relevant to the listener. Prediction errors in the attended conversation capture attention, while predictions that prove correct in unattended conversations are filtered out. Only when something unexpected happens in an unattended conversation does it break through the selective prediction filtering. Temporal illusions in music demonstrate predictive timing. When a musician rushes slightly before a beat or lags slightly behind, listeners predict where the beat should be and experience the timing as aligned with their prediction. Small deviations from predicted timing create a sense of rhythm variations. The predictive timing system also explains tempo perception. Faster sequences of sounds are predicted differently than slower sequences. The same actual timing can feel fast or slow, depending on what timing intervals are being predicted. Attention is fundamentally directed by prediction. Where your consciousness focuses next is largely determined by what your brain predicts will be important. This is why magic and deception work. The magician creates a situation where your brain predicts something will happen in a particular location. Your attention follows that prediction. While your attention is engaged with the predicted location, actual events happen elsewhere. Your attention is not freely choosing where to look. It's being guided by predictions that the magician has deliberately manipulated. Orienting of attention towards surprising events demonstrates the prediction-attention relationship. When something unexpected happens, your attention immediately moves toward it. A loud noise in a quiet environment triggers an automatic shift of attention. This happens because the noise is a prediction error. Unexpected events break through the filtering and capture attention automatically. Experts attend to different things than novices in the same scene because they have different predictions about what's important. A chess expert looking at a board position has developed predictions about which regions contain meaningful information. The expert's attention moves to locations that typically contain strategically important patterns. A novice hasn't developed these predictions, and their attention is distributed less efficiently. The expert's superior performance emerges from superior predictions that guide attention more effectively. In sports, expert athletes have superior predictions about where the action will be. A basketball player predicts where teammates and opponents will move and attends to those locations before the movements happen. A novice predicts less accurately, and their attention lags behind actual movement. Expertise emerges from prediction accuracy. Visual search, where you look for a target among distractors, depends on predictions about where the target might be. When searching for a red object among green objects, your brain predicts that the target will be red, and it attends preferentially to red locations. Search is faster when predictions are accurate. When unexpected colors are intermixed with targets, search becomes slow because predictions are frequently violated. Sustained attention also depends on prediction. When you maintain attention on a task despite distractions, you're maintaining a prediction about what information is relevant. Distractions are other predictions trying to capture attention. Successful sustained attention means your relevant prediction remains dominant. ADHD may involve difficulties maintaining prediction stability. Attentional blink A period when a second target is missed if it appears briefly after a first target reflects prediction dynamics. Your attention is focused on the first target, making predictions about that target. A second target appearing shortly after the first is a prediction error that takes time to process. During the time your prediction system is adjusting to incorporate the new information, a second target is missed. Cueing studies show that when you're given a predictive cue about where a target will appear, your attention moves to that location and perception improves. Valid cues, cues that correctly predict target location, improve performance. Invalid cues, cues that misdirect predictions, actually impair performance compared to no cue. Your brain invests attention based on predictions, and predictions that prove wrong have consequences. Memory and prediction are so intertwined that memory is essentially a prediction system. Your brain stores memories because they're useful for making predictions about the future. When you remember a past event, you're not accessing a perfect recording. You're retrieving predictions that past events have taught you. Memory consolidation, the process of transferring short-term memories to long-term form, involves prediction. Events that violate predictions are consolidated more strongly than events that match predictions. The brain marks prediction errors as important because they indicate the predictive model needs updating. Traumatic memories are consolidated intensely because trauma violates fundamental predictions about safety. The brain is trying hard to never make the same prediction mistake again. Reconsolidation, the process of updating memories, also depends on prediction. When you recall a memory, that memory becomes malleable temporarily. If the memory produces a prediction error when you think about it, the memory is updated to better match current information. Memories are continuously refined based on prediction errors that occur during recall. Autobiographical memory, memories of your own life, is reconstructed based on predictions about what typically happens in different contexts. You don't remember every moment of a familiar activity like your commute home. Instead, you remember the typical sequence of events and embellish details based on how commutes typically proceed. False memories often form when predictions about what should have happened become so strong that the brain generates a memory of that predicted event happening. A suggestion that you experienced an event that actually never happened can lead to a false memory if the brain's predictions make that event seem plausible and consistent with other memories. Schema memories organize information around predictive frames. When you experience a restaurant visit, your brain organizes the memory using this schema. Details that fit the schema are remembered better. Details that don't fit are often forgotten because they don't align with the schema predictions. Flashbulb memories, vivid memories of surprising events, form because the events violated predictions so dramatically that the memory is deeply encoded. The brain treats unexpected information as important and consolidates it strongly. Memory suppression, or retrieval-induced forgetting, occurs when memories that don't support current predictions are actively inhibited. If one memory contradicts another memory, or contradicts your current understanding, the conflicting memory may be suppressed. Memories aren't stable recordings, but dynamic predictions that change based on what predictions currently dominate. Memory errors systematically follow predictions. You're more likely to falsely remember something that's consistent with your predictions and less likely to remember things that violate predictions. The pattern of memory errors reveals the predictions the brain is making. Eyewitness testimony is unreliable because eyewitnesses' memories are shaped by predictions about what must have happened. A person's memory of a crime is influenced by their predictions about how crimes typically occur. Misleading post-event information shapes memory because it creates new predictions that compete with original memories. The original prediction about what happened becomes less dominant than the new prediction suggested by misleading information. Dreams involve prediction in unusual ways. The brain is largely cut off from external sensory input during sleep, so dreams may represent the brain's predictive system running in a relatively unconstrained way. The predictive brain is constantly generating predictions about what will happen next. During waking, these predictions are continuously checked against actual sensory input. During dreams, this checking mechanism is largely offline. The predictive system generates scenarios and sequences, but there's no reality testing. Dreams often involve rapid scene changes and illogical sequences. These may reflect the brain rapidly shifting between different predictive models. In waking life, predictions are constrained by sensory input. In dreams, predictions aren't constrained by reality, so they can shift freely. You transition from one scenario to another without the logical connections that would exist in waking thought. REM sleep, when most vivid dreaming occurs, shows high activity in visual cortex and high activity in areas involved in prediction and memory. The cortical activity pattern during REM sleep resembles the pattern during waking perception and prediction. The brain appears to be running simulations during REM sleep. Dream vividness may reflect the strength of predictions the brain is generating. Nightmares may represent prediction errors that are so strong that they generate intense negative emotional predictions. The brain is predicting danger or threat. Even though the threat is imagined, the prediction system generates the emotional response. Lucid dreaming, when the dreamer becomes aware they're dreaming, may involve activation of metacognitive prediction systems. The dreamer develops a prediction that they're in a dream, and that prediction overrides the sensory predictions that had been dominant. Sleep paralysis involves a disconnect between motor predictions and actual motor output. The brain is predicting movement, but the motor system is inhibited. The prediction-reality mismatch creates a frightening experience, where people feel they can't move despite feeling conscious. Sleepwalking may involve dissociation between predictive systems for action and consciousness. The motor system is executing predictions, but consciousness isn't engaged in monitoring those predictions. Memory consolidation during sleep likely involves prediction. The brain appears to replay recent experiences during sleep, potentially refining the predictive models those experiences created. Sleep appears to be when the brain optimizes predictions based on recent experience. Dream emotion may reflect predictions about what will happen. Fear in a dream reflects fear predictions the brain is generating. The emotional response isn't to actual threat but to predicted threat. This shows how powerfully the brain's predictions influence emotional states, even when the stimulus is imaginary. The cerebral cortex is the brain region most directly implementing predictive processing. The cortex is organized in layers that support prediction and error correction. Higher layers of cortex generate top-down predictions and send them to lower layers. Lower layers represent actual sensory input and also receive feedback from higher layers. This bidirectional communication allows continuous comparison between prediction and sensory reality. The hierarchical organization of the cortex naturally implements predictive processing. Information flows upward from sensory input and downward from predictions. Lateral connections within layers allow integration and refinement of predictions. Feedback from higher areas shapes how lower areas process sensory input. Primary sensory cortices receive massive feedback from higher areas. Some estimates suggest that more synapses carry feedback signals than carry forward sensory signals. This means predictions are actually dominating the neural circuitry of perception. Sensory input is important, but predictions may be doing more neural work than sensation. Visual cortex shows activity that matches visual predictions before visual input arrives. Imaging studies show that visual areas activate for predicted motion of objects even before those objects move. The predictive state of visual cortex before sensory input arrives shapes how that sensory input will be processed. Auditory cortex similarly generates predictions about sound before sound arrives. Speech neurons activate for predicted speech sounds before those sounds are heard. The predictive state of auditory cortex determines how auditory input will be interpreted The prefrontal cortex, particularly anterior areas like the frontopolar cortex, appears to initiate prediction processes that later become conscious. This region generates predictions about abstract future events. Activity in prefrontal cortex predicts choices seconds before consciousness reports making those choices. The prefrontal cortex implements long-term planning and abstract prediction. Parietal cortex integrates information from multiple sensory systems and generates coordinated predictions about body position and action. Damage to parietal cortex disrupts predictions about where the body is in space and how it should move. The insular cortex represents predictions about internal bodily states. This is how emotions are predicted. The brain predicts hunger, fatigue, pain, and other internal states. When these predictions are confirmed by actual internal sensory input, the prediction error is minimal and emotion flows smoothly. When internal state violates predictions, emotion becomes intense. The anterior cingulate cortex is involved in error monitoring and conflict resolution. When predictions conflict with actual input, the anterior cingulate generates signals that attention should be redirected. This is how prediction errors drive learning. The error signal from anterior cingulate allows the brain to adjust predictions based on the discrepancy between what was predicted and what actually occurred. The cerebellum was traditionally thought to be involved mainly in motor coordination, but it has a massive role in prediction. The cerebellum contains more neurons than the rest of the brain combined and appears to be a prediction machine. The cerebellum has a unique organization with Purkinje cells and granule cells that implement a prediction algorithm. The cerebellum generates timing predictions and coordinated movement predictions. When you perform a movement, the cerebellum predicts how that movement will change your sensory input. A throwing movement generates a prediction about how your arm will move and how the target will change position. The motor command is combined with a cerebellar prediction about the consequences of that movement. This allows real-time movement adjustments said on predictions. Cerebellar damage disrupts movement timing and coordination. Patients with cerebellar ataxia have difficulty performing smooth movements because they can't predict how movements will unfold. The cerebellum also appears involved in predicting sensory consequences of movement. When you move your hand to touch something, the cerebellum predicts what sensation will occur. This prediction can actually suppress sensation. When you touch your own skin, the sensation is weaker than when someone else touches you. The cerebellum predicts the tactile sensations that your own touch will create and reduces their intensity. This is why you can't tickle yourself. Your cerebellum predicts the tickling sensation and suppresses it. Someone else tickling you violates the prediction and the sensation isn't suppressed. The cerebellum is involved in eye movement predictions. When your eyes move, the cerebellum generates a prediction about how the visual world will appear to shift. This allows visual perception to remain stable even though the eyes are moving. Without cerebellar function, the world would appear to shift with every eye movement. The cerebellum coordinates predictions across multiple sensory systems. When you hear a sound and turn to look at it, the cerebellum helps coordinate the prediction that the visual and auditory information should come from the same direction. Misalignment between sensory predictions from the cerebellum is uncomfortable and is what creates the illusion of moving rooms. The cerebellum is continuously learning from prediction errors. Each time a movement produces an unexpected sensory consequence, the cerebellum updates its prediction. This is how motor learning occurs. Practice refines cerebellar predictions about how movements produce sensory consequences. Expert motor skills emerge from precise cerebellar predictions. The basal ganglia select among competing predictions and determine which predicted action will be executed. The basal ganglia are involved in action selection and decision-making. They receive input from cortical areas representing different possible actions. The basal ganglia evaluate these different action predictions and select which one should be executed. The striatum, a major component of basal ganglia, receives input from large areas of cortex. Different regions of striatum receive input about different possible actions. The striatum evaluates these different action predictions and generates feedback to cortex about which actions should be selected. Dopamine in the basal ganglia appears to signal whether predictions are accurate. When an action produces a better outcome than predicted, dopamine neurons increase firing. This reward prediction error signal drives learning about which actions produce good outcomes. When an action produces worse outcome than predicted, dopamine decreases. The prediction error drives updating of action predictions. Habit learning, where actions become automatic through repetition, appears to involve the basal ganglia refining action predictions. Through practice, certain situations reliably predict certain actions. The basal ganglia learns these stimulus-action associations. Once learned, the appropriate action is predicted automatically in that situation. Goal-directed action involves the prefrontal cortex and uses more flexible predictions. The basal ganglia are also involved in timing predictions. Different regions of the basal ganglia contain neural ensembles that show ramping activity. This ramping activity encodes how much time has elapsed and predicts when time intervals should end. Dopamine modulates this timing. Drugs that affect dopamine disrupt time perception, confirming that dopamine is involved in temporal prediction. The basal ganglia also appear involved in evaluating social predictions. Damage to basal ganglia components disrupts social decision-making. The basal ganglia may be using similar prediction algorithms for social actions as for motor actions, evaluating which social response is appropriate in different situations. The basal ganglia gate access to consciousness. Activity in the basal ganglia determines which predictions and which action plans gain sufficient prominence to reach consciousness. The basal ganglia may implement the gating mechanism that determines what information becomes conscious. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter most directly involved in prediction. Dopamine neurons encode prediction errors. When an actual outcome matches a predicted outcome, dopamine firing doesn't change from baseline. When an actual outcome is better than predicted, dopamine increases. When an actual outcome is worse than predicted, dopamine decreases. This dopamine signal drives learning. The brain adjusts its predictions based on dopamine-encoded prediction errors. Dopamine neurons don't simply encode reward. They encode deviation from predicted reward. A large reward is disappointing if it was predicted. A small reward is delightful if it was unexpected. Dopamine is tracking the surprise, not the value. Dopamine transmission in the prefrontal cortex appears critical for working memory and planning. Dopamine allows the prefrontal cortex to maintain predictions about future states. Drugs that increase dopamine improve performance on tasks requiring future prediction. Drugs that decrease dopamine impair prediction-dependent performance. Serotonin appears involved in social prediction and mood. Serotonin systems are involved in learning about social status and predicting social outcomes. Depression may involve inaccurate social predictions, predicting negative outcomes when positive outcomes are likely. Serotonin reuptake inhibitors improve mood, possibly by adjusting social predictions. Glutamate is the primary excitatory neurotransmitter and is central to prediction error mechanisms. Glutamate receptor activation implements the comparison between predicted and actual sensory input. GABA is the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. GABA circuitry implements the filtering that allows only prediction errors to propagate forward. Acetylcholine appears involved in attention to prediction errors. Acetylcholine signaling indicates that something unexpected has happened. This signals that learning is needed. Norepinephrine is involved in arousal and attention. Norepinephrine increases when predictions are violated and attention shifts. Norepinephrine appears to encode the certainty or uncertainty of predictions. High norepinephrine during uncertainty signals that the environment may be unpredictable. Endocannabinoids modulate learning from prediction errors. These neurotransmitters appear involved in deciding how much to update predictions based on observed errors. Endocannabinoid signaling may implement uncertainty weighting that determines how much to trust predictions versus sensory input. Infants develop prediction abilities gradually throughout development. Newborns show simple prediction behaviors, but their predictions are weak and easily overridden. A newborn can't yet maintain a stable prediction about where an object is when it disappears from view. Object permanence, the prediction that an object continues to exist when hidden, develops gradually through infancy. Young infants lack stable predictions about object identity and persistence. By around 8 months, infants show looking patterns that suggest they're predicting where hidden objects will appear. The infants gaze toward the location where an object should reappear, suggesting they maintain a prediction even when the object is hidden. This represents a major developmental milestone in prediction ability. Speech prediction develops through infancy and early childhood. Infants initially respond to all phonetic distinctions in human speech. By the end of the first year, infants have learned the phonetic distinctions relevant to their native language. This learning reflects development of native language predictions. Infants whose native language makes a particular phonetic distinction continue to perceive that distinction. Infants whose native language doesn't make that distinction stop perceiving it, even though the auditory input remains identical. The developing brain refines predictions based on language exposure. Motor development reflects developing prediction about how actions produce sensory consequences. Young infants flail their limbs somewhat randomly. As development proceeds, the cerebellum learns to predict sensory consequences of movements. Motor control improves as predictions become more accurate. Walking requires predicting how balance will shift as different limbs move. Running and jumping involve even more sophisticated temporal predictions. Fine motor skills like writing or playing music reflect highly refined cerebellar predictions. Social prediction develops through childhood as children learn to predict others' behavior. Young children show difficulties with theory of mind, predicting what others know or believe. Around age 4 or 5, most children develop consistent theory of mind abilities. This reflects development of social prediction models. Teenagers show dramatic social prediction errors and misinterpretations of social signals. Adolescent brain development reorganizes prediction systems, particularly in regions involved in social reasoning. Pubertal changes and hormonal development alter social predictions. During adolescence, familiar social situations that were predictable may become unpredictable. The brain is rebuilding social prediction models. Adult expertise develops through refining predictions in specific domains. Musicians develop precise predictions about timing and acoustic properties of their instruments. Athletes develop predictions about how their bodies will move and how opponents will behave. Experts develop stronger predictions than novices in their domain of expertise. As people age, prediction abilities sometimes decline. Older adults show larger prediction errors in some motor tasks. Older adults may have weaker cerebellar function that reduces the precision of movement predictions. However, older adults often show advantages in tasks relying on semantic prediction and knowledge-based prediction. Wisdom in older age may reflect refined predictive models accumulated over decades. Older adults have seen countless situations and developed accurate predictions about how human behavior unfolds in different contexts. They can predict the likely consequences of various choices because they've seen how similar choices played out many times before. This accumulated predictive knowledge makes older adults valuable in advisory roles and in making decisions that benefit from long-term perspective. The developing brain undergoes substantial reorganization during adolescence. The prefrontal cortex continues developing into the 20s. This means predictions about abstract future consequences continue developing through late adolescence. Teenagers can predict immediate consequences but show deficits in predicting distant future consequences. Risk-taking in adolescence may partly reflect developing predictions about future consequences. As the prefrontal cortex continues developing, predictions about long-term consequences become stronger, and risk-taking typically decreases. Practice refines predictions in any domain. Someone learning to play a musical instrument initially has weak predictions about how finger movements will produce sounds. Through practice, the cerebellum learns to predict the acoustic consequences of finger movements with great precision. Expert musicians can predict exactly what sound a particular finger position will produce without looking. Their predictions have become so accurate that they can execute complex music without conscious attention to individual movements. Learning academic subjects like mathematics involves developing predictions about which solution strategies will work for different problem types. A student first learning mathematics has weak predictions and must consciously work through problems. An experienced mathematician has strong predictions about problem structure and solution paths. The experienced mathematician's predictions are so strong that solutions seem obvious, while students who don't share those predictions find the same problems incomprehensibly difficult. Fear conditioning in development shows how predictions about danger develop. A child who has had a frightening experience with a dog develops a prediction that dogs are dangerous. This prediction persists even if the child later encounters friendly dogs. The prediction error that friendly dogs generate isn't always strong enough to overcome the early fear prediction. This is why early experiences have such lasting effects on predictions. A child's early interactions with caregivers establish predictions about whether the world is safe and whether people can be trusted. These predictions persist into adulthood and influence relationship formation and social behavior. Secure attachment in infancy involves the child developing predictions that caregivers will respond to distress with comfort. Insecure attachment develops predictions that caregivers may not be available or reliable. These attachment predictions persist and shape adult relationships. The evolutionary history of prediction reveals why the human brain became so dependent on this system. Simple organisms like bacteria don't predict much. They respond to chemical gradients and move toward nutrients. But as organisms grew more complex, prediction became increasingly valuable. A fish that could predict where prey would be was more likely to eat. A predator that could predict its prey's escape routes was more likely to survive. Over millions of years, natural selection favored brains that were better at prediction. Mammals developed larger brains relative to their body size compared to reptiles. This increase in brain size correlated with better predictive abilities. Primates, with even larger brains, developed sophisticated predictions about social behavior and tool use. Humans took this further, developing abstract predictions about language, mathematics, and future possibilities. The entire trajectory of brain evolution has been toward better prediction. Every time a new brain structure evolved, it was typically designed to make better predictions about some aspect of the world. When you look at the structure of mammalian brains, you see predictions everywhere. The cortex evolved new layers that allow hierarchical prediction. The cerebellum exploded in size in mammals. The basal ganglia elaborated new structures. Every major innovation in brain evolution seems designed to improve prediction. The human brain is about 3 times larger than our evolutionary ancestors from a few million years ago. This expansion occurred primarily in cortical regions involved in prediction. We didn't just grow a bigger sensory cortex. We grew bigger prefrontal cortex for predicting abstract possibilities. We grew bigger parietal cortex for predicting where our body is in space. We grew more elaborate striatal systems for predicting which actions will produce desired outcomes. The brain has literally reorganized itself to become a better prediction machine. Natural selection has optimized prediction ability because it provides such a strong survival advantage. An organism that can't predict starves. An organism that predicts poorly gets eaten. Only organisms with accurate predictions survive long enough to reproduce. This means thousands of generations of selection pressure pushing brains toward better prediction. The result is a human brain that's so optimized for prediction that prediction is happening constantly, mostly outside conscious awareness. In fact, the brain is so committed to prediction that it generates predictions even when it's not receiving sensory input, such as during sleep or imagination. Animals demonstrate prediction abilities that rival or exceed human abilities in specific domains. A hunting cheetah doesn't aim where the gazelle is, it aims where the gazelle will be. The cheetah predicts the prey's movement and directs its attack to intercept. This is predictive targeting that happens automatically. The cheetah's brain calculates trajectory prediction without conscious deliberation. The cheetah watches the gazelle's body position and acceleration and predicts multiple possible escape routes. The cheetah's brain weighs these predictions and positions itself where the gazelle is most likely to be. This happens in seconds. A bird navigating toward a distant tree predicts where the tree will be relative to the bird's current velocity. The bird flying through a forest predicts the location of branches before reaching them. The bird's brain generates predictions about three-dimensional space ahead of the actual flight path. This allows the bird to fly rapidly through complex environments without crashing. Predicting spatial relationships at high speed is computationally demanding, yet birds do it automatically. A small bird weaving through dense forest predicts collisions fractions of a second before they could occur. The bird adjusts trajectory based on these predictions. If the bird had to wait to see obstacles, the bird would crash constantly. The bird's predictions must account for its own movement, the movement of branches in wind, and the spatial relationships in 3 dimensions. This is a remarkable computational achievement accomplished by a brain smaller than a pea. Insects show remarkable prediction abilities considering their small brains. A dragonfly intercepts moving prey by predicting trajectory. A fly evades a swatter by predicting the swatter's path. The fly's escape behavior demonstrates prediction of threat trajectories. A fly's brain reacts in about 50 milliseconds, but the fly's decision about which direction to escape is based on predictions about where the swatter will be, not where it currently is. These insects have millions of neurons, not billions, yet they execute complex predictions. A fly's escape is successful not because it reacts faster than a human can move, but because the fly predicts where the threat will be and moves away from that predicted location. The fly cannot possibly outrun a swatter based on reaction speed alone, yet it consistently escapes. Predicting movement and trajectory appears to be a fundamental capability of animal brains across species. Migrating animals predict seasonal changes and navigate based on those predictions. A salmon predicts that rivers will be flowing toward the ocean at certain times of year. The salmon swims against the current for thousands of miles, guided by predictions about where the spawning grounds are located. The salmon hasn't been there before in its life, but has inherited prediction systems that guide it correctly. The salmon has never taken this route, yet it finds the exact stream where it was born. This is prediction based on inherited predictive models. The salmon's brain contains predictions that have been refined by natural selection over thousands of generations. The salmon predicts ocean currents, river temperatures, and seasonal timing with remarkable accuracy. Birds migrating across continents predict weather patterns and wind directions. They know when to migrate based on day length. Their brains predict that food will disappear and movement will become necessary. The migration happens at the right time because the brain is predicting seasonal changes. The timing of migration is often accurate to within days, even though the bird is reading subtle changes in daylight duration. The bird's brain makes predictions about atmospheric pressure, temperature patterns, and food availability thousands of miles away. The bird follows these predictions with remarkable consistency, arriving at specific locations on specific dates year after year. Social animals predict the behavior of other group members. A wolf in a pack predicts what other wolves will do. The wolf pack hunts cooperatively because each wolf predicts what the others will do. This allows coordinated action that would be impossible without prediction of other animals' behavior. Wolves coordinate attacks from multiple directions, with each wolf predicting what the others will do. The coordination is so precise that an external observer would think the wolves had a detailed plan, yet the coordination emerges from each wolf's predictions about what the others will do. A primate in a group predicts what other primates are thinking based on their behavior and facial expressions. The primate can predict which group members are allies and which are threats. Social prediction ability is directly linked to group success. Animals that can't predict other animals' behavior are outcompeted by animals that can. This selective pressure has made prediction of other minds a core feature of animal cognition. Sports performance at the highest levels emerges almost entirely from superior prediction. A baseball batter has only about 200 milliseconds to decide whether to swing after the pitch is released. The ball is traveling at 90 miles per hour. At that speed, the ball covers the distance from pitcher to batter in about 400 milliseconds total. The batter has already made the decision to swing before actually seeing where the ball is. The batter is predicting where the ball will be based on the pitcher's motion, arm angle, and release point. An expert batter develops predictions about different pitcher patterns. A fastball looks different than a curveball right after release. The expert batter sees the initial trajectory and predicts what the final trajectory will be. The prediction is so accurate that the batter can decide to swing or not before the ball reaches the strike zone. A novice batter is slower because the prediction is weaker. The novice is still trying to see where the ball is going when the ball is almost at the batter's box. By then, it's too late to swing. Expert hitters appear to have superhuman reflexes, but actually have superior predictions. The batter's success comes from years of practice developing predictions about pitcher tendencies and ball physics. The expert batter has seen thousands of pitches and developed deep predictive models. The batter's brain can predict the exact trajectory from the initial release point with remarkable accuracy. A tennis player returning serve faces a similar challenge. The serve is coming at over 100 miles per hour from 60 feet away. The player has about 300 milliseconds to start moving. The player can't see the ball clearly in the final moments before it arrives. The player must predict where the ball will land based on the server's position, toss height, and initial ball trajectory. Expert tennis players predict the landing position before the server even makes contact. The player is already moving toward the correct location when novice players are still processing where the ball is. The tennis player's prediction system has learned thousands of server patterns and predicts from subtle cues. The player watches the server's body position, arm angle, and toss height and makes predictions that are accurate enough to position the racket in the correct location. A soccer goalkeeper making a save from a penalty kick must predict where the ball will go. The goalkeeper can't wait to see where the ball is going, because by then it's too late. The goalkeeper must predict the kicker's intention based on approach angle and body position and hip rotation. Goalkeepers who predict accurately stop the ball. Goalkeepers with weaker predictions get scored on. The most successful goalkeepers are those with the best predictions about where shots will be directed. Elite goalkeepers study kickers and learn their patterns. The goalkeeper's brain has developed detailed predictions about different kickers' tendencies. An ice hockey goalie stopping a slap shot faces a puck moving at over 100 miles per hour from a distance of 30 feet. The goalie has less time to react than any other position in any sport. The goalie stops the puck only by predicting the shot direction. The prediction happens before the puck is visible in the final mome. NTs. The goalie's positioning before the shot reflects predictions about where the shot will likely go. A quarterback in football predicts where a receiver will be. The receiver is running a route that hasn't been executed yet. The quarterback decides where to throw based on prediction of where the receiver will be when the ball arrives. If the prediction is wrong, the pass is incomplete or intercepted. The quarterback's performance depends almost entirely on accurate prediction of receiver position and defensive coverage. Great quarterbacks develop superhuman ability to predict receiver positioning because they practice the same routes thousands of times. These sports examples demonstrate that expert performance emerges from superior prediction. The athlete appears to move faster, react faster, and see better. Actually, the athlete is predicting more accurately. The athlete's brain is anticipating what will happen next instead of reacting to what's happening now. Superior prediction is what separates elite athletes from good athletes. Music expertise involves developing extraordinary predictions about timing and auditory patterns. A musician reading sheet music isn't simply executing written instructions. The musician is predicting the auditory consequences of finger movements. An experienced pianist reading a piece has predicted thousands of times what notes will result from specific finger positions. The pianist's fingers move automatically toward the correct keys because predictions about key locations are deeply learned. A novice pianist must consciously think about where to place each finger. The novice's predictions are weak, so the novice must rely on conscious guidance. An expert pianist appears to play without thinking. The pianist is playing entirely from prediction. The pianist's predictions about auditory consequences are so strong that they drive finger movement automatically. The pianist's brain has developed such precise predictions that hand position and auditory result are inseparable in consciousness. A drummer maintaining a steady beat is making continuous timing predictions. The drummer's brain predicts when the next beat should occur. The drummer's hands move at precisely the right moment because the predictions about beat timing are accurate. A drummer who's slightly off tempo is making prediction errors about beat timing. The drummer's brain is predicting the timing incorrectly, and the hands move at the wrong moment. Expert drummers develop predictions about beat timing so accurate that they maintain perfect tempo across minutes of playing. The drummer's predictions are calibrated to the point where the hands move with mechanical precision. A singer produces the correct pitch by predicting what pitch their voice will produce. The singer isn't listening to their voice and then correcting. The singer predicts what pitch will result from specific vocal adjustments. The singer's brain sends motor commands that will produce the desired pitch based on predictive models. A singer who's off-key is making prediction errors about what pitch will result from their vocal settings. Professional singers develop predictions so precise that they can hit specific pitches in the dark without hearing themselves. Musicians in an ensemble must predict what other musicians will do. A string quartet player must predict the timing and dynamic choices of the other players. The quartet player predicts what the violinist will do and coordinates their own playing accordingly. If one player's predictions about the others are incorrect, the ensemble falls apart. Expert ensembles have developed shared predictive models. Each player predicts what the others will do, and the predictions align with actual playing. This allows seamless coordination. The quartet players often don't look at each other because their predictions are so accurate. Jazz musicians improvise by making rapid predictions. A jazz musician predicting what the next chord change will be. The musician predicts what harmonic direction makes sense and plays accordingly. Jazz improvisation is entirely dependent on accurate prediction of harmonic structure and what other musicians will play. Musicians who can't predict harmonic development can't improvise effectively. The best improvisers have predictions so strong that they can predict multiple bar measures ahead. Reading depends entirely on prediction about upcoming words. When you read a sentence, your brain is predicting what words will come next. Your visual system fixates on certain words but skips others. You skip words that your brain has predicted. You fixate on words that violate your prediction or contain unexpected information. An expert reader reads faster than a novice reader because the expert has stronger predictions. The expert reader skips more words because the predictions are more accurate. A novice reader needs to see more words because the predictions are more accurate. A novice reader needs to see more words because the predictions are weaker. Research has shown that expert readers skip approximately 30% of words while still comprehending completely. The skipped words are predicted so confidently that seeing them is unnecessary. When you read a familiar phrase like, "have a nice day," your brain doesn't need to see every word clearly. Your brain predicts the entire phrase from the first word or two. You might not even see the word day at the end, because your brain predicted what the phrase would be. When you encounter a misspelling or unusual word, you immediately notice it. Your prediction was violated. The prediction error captures attention and forces you to look at the word carefully. This is why typos immediately stand out, even if you're reading quickly. When reading difficult material where you don't have strong predictions, your reading slows down. You must see each word clearly because predictions are weak. You must consciously process material that an expert could process automatically through prediction. Foreign language reading is slow and difficult because you don't have strong predictions about word sequences. A native speaker reading the same text has strong predictions and reads quickly. The native speaker's brain predicts upcoming words and reads automatically. The non-native speaker lacks predictive models, so reading requires conscious attention. Reading comprehension involves predicting meaning. When you read, "The student was bored by the lecture," you predict that the student will stop paying attention. You don't need to be told explicitly. Your brain predicts the consequence because you've learned that boredom leads to inattention. Readers who can't predict meaning struggle with comprehension. Expert readers generate rich predictions about how a story will develop. The reader predicts character motivations and plot directions. When the story violates these predictions, the reader experiences surprise. Skilled writers use prediction violations to create suspense. The writer establishes predictions about what will happen and then violates them. Readers who can't predict patterns can't feel suspense because they don't have predictions to violate. Speed reading is possible only to the extent that you have strong predictions. A speed reader doesn't see every word. The speed reader predicts the content and skips words that align with prediction. When the text violates predictions, the speed reader slows down and reads more carefully. The effectiveness of speed reading depends entirely on how strong your predictive models are for the specific type of text being read. Conversation is fundamentally driven by prediction. When someone is speaking to you, you're constantly predicting what they will say next. Your brain generates predictions about upcoming words based on the speaker's speech patterns and the context of the conversation. An experienced conversation partner develops accurate predictions. You know how your friend talks and what they're likely to say. Your brain predicts their speech, and you experience the conversation as smooth and natural. A conversation with a stranger is more effortful because predictions are weaker. You must listen more carefully because you're not sure what the stranger will say. Conversation breaks down when predictions fail. If someone says something completely unexpected, there's an awkward pause while your brain processes the prediction violation. If someone constantly violates your conversational predictions, the conversation feels uncomfortable. Skilled conversationalists develop accurate predictions. A parent understands their child's speech patterns and predicts upcoming words easily. A therapist develops predictions about a client's speech patterns. A salesperson develops predictions about customer speech patterns. These skilled communicators experience conversations as flowing smoothly because their predictions are accurate. The therapist or salesperson's predictions allow them to anticipate concerns and address them before they're explicitly stated. When someone interrupts you mid-sentence, the interruption is possible only because the other person predicted what you were about to say. The interrupter heard the beginning of your sentence and predicted how you would complete it. The prediction was accurate enough that the interrupter could complete your thought or disrupt it. Interrupted conversations reveal prediction. Someone who frequently interrupts you has developed strong predictions about what you'll say. Someone who never interrupts you may have weaker predictions. Conversation pacing depends on prediction. If both conversationalists have strong predictions about what the other will say, the conversation flows rapidly. If predictions are weak, the conversation is slower and more hesitant. When two people have shared experience, their predictions about each other are usually accurate. Friends develop strong predictions about each other's speech patterns and respond before the other person finishes speaking. This creates an appearance of rapport and connection. In reality, the connection exists because the predictions are accurate. The best conversations between friends happen when both people can predict each other's thoughts and responses. Turn-taking in conversation depends on prediction. You predict when the other person will finish speaking, and you take your turn. If you predict incorrectly, you interrupt or you wait awkwardly. Skilled conversationalists develop accurate predictions about when others finish, and turn-taking appears smooth. Uncomfortable silences often result from both people mispredicting when the other person was finished speaking. Driving ability largely depends on prediction of traffic and road conditions. An experienced driver predicts what other drivers will do. The driver sees another car approaching an intersection and predicts whether the car will stop or accelerate. This prediction guides the driver's own behavior. A driver who can't predict other drivers' behavior is dangerous because the driver reacts to what's already happening instead of anticipating. A novice driver often appears surprised by what other drivers do. The novice hasn't developed accurate predictions about traffic behavior. An expert driver appears to anticipate everything. The expert is making accurate predictions about what other drivers will do. The expert predicts not just immediate actions but chains of actions. A driver on a familiar road drives on autopilot. The driver's brain predicts the curves, the traffic patterns, the timing of traffic lights. The driver has driven the road so many times that predictions are accurate enough that conscious attention isn't needed. The driver's hands and feet move automatically, guided by predictions. The same driver on an unfamiliar road is more attentive. The predictions about road layout and traffic are weaker. The driver must pay conscious attention because predictions can't be trusted. Hazard perception in driving depends on prediction. A skilled driver recognizes potential hazards before they develop. The driver predicts that a child might run into the street because the driver has learned to recognize the signs. The driver predicts that a stopped car might suddenly reverse. The driver predicts these possibilities because they've learned to recognize situations that precede hazards. A novice driver doesn't recognize hazards until they're obvious. The novice lacks the predictive models that would allow early recognition. A taxi driver who's driven the same city for years develops extraordinary predictions. The taxi driver predicts traffic patterns, knows which routes will be clear, and anticipates problems before they occur. A taxi driver new to the city makes worse time predictions because the predictive models are incomplete. Highway driving involves predictions about vehicle dynamics. A driver predicts how quickly the car will accelerate, how much distance is needed to stop, how the car will handle curves. These predictions come from experience with the vehicle. A driver in an unfamiliar vehicle must consciously relearn these predictions. The driver estimates stopping distance based on predictions about the car's braking that turn out to be wrong. Experienced drivers sometimes crash in unfamiliar cars because their predictions about the vehicle don't match the actual vehicle's behavior. Learning in any domain involves developing stronger predictive models. A student learning mathematics develops predictions about which solution strategies will work for different problem types. The student with weak predictions must consciously work through each problem. The expert mathematician has predictions so strong that the solution seems obvious. The difference between struggling and excelling at mathematics often comes down to prediction accuracy. A student learning to play an instrument develops predictions about how finger movements produce sounds. The student with weak predictions must think consciously about each note. The expert musician's predictions are so strong that playing happens automatically. A person learning a language develops predictions about word sequences and grammatical patterns. The learner with weak predictions must consciously think about grammar. The fluent speaker's predictions are so strong that speech flows automatically. Expertise in any field involves having accumulated predictive models that match the domain. An architect developing a building design predicts how the building will function. An architect with strong predictions can design efficiently. An architect with weak predictions struggles because the predictions don't match how the building will actually work. The architect builds a mental model of the building and predicts how people will move through spaces and how weather will affect different areas. A surgeon developing a technique predicts how tissues will respond. The surgeon with accurate predictions can execute with confidence. The surgeon with weak predictions struggles because the techniques don't work as predicted. The surgeon's hands move guided by predictions about tissue behavior developed through years of practice. Learning involves prediction error correction. A student attempts a problem and gets it wrong. The prediction error signals that the predictive model needs adjustment. The student modifies the model based on the prediction error. This is how learning happens. Without prediction errors, there's no learning. A person who never makes mistakes isn't learning because there are no prediction errors to drive adjustment. Learning is often uncomfortable because it involves making prediction errors and recognizing that your predictions were wrong. Students who can tolerate prediction errors learn faster because they're willing to try and fail. Students who avoid prediction errors learn slowly because they stick with strategies they know work, even if better strategies exist. The students most successful at learning are those who embrace prediction errors as opportunities to refine their predictive models. Cultural patterns shape predictions. The cultural environment teaches the brain what predictions are likely to be accurate. A person raised in a culture that values individual achievement develops different predictions about how to succeed than a person raised in a culture that values group harmony. The first person predicts that individual effort will lead to success. The second person predicts that group cooperation will lead to success. Both predictions are learned based on observation of the culture. The person's entire motivational system develops around these different predictions. Cultural differences in perception emerge from cultural differences in prediction. People from different cultures perceive the same visual scene differently because they have different predictive models. A person raised in a culture with many straight lines and rectangular buildings develops different spatial predictions than a person raised in a culture with curved natural architecture. The first person perceives straight lines more easily. The second person perceives curved shapes more easily. This isn't a difference in visual ability. This is a difference in the predictive models developed through cultural exposure. Language shapes prediction. A person speaking a language where nouns must be classified as masculine or feminine develops different grammatical predictions than a person speaking a language without grammatical gender. The bilingual person speaks each language with different predictive patterns because each language has different patterns. When switching languages, the bilingual person's brain switches predictive models. Cultural rituals teach predictions. A person raised in a culture that has specific greeting rituals develops predictions. When people from different cultures meet, their prediction mismatches create awkwardness. One person is predicting a formal greeting, while the other is predicting a casual greeting. The predictions clash, and the interaction feels uncomfortable. Cuisine preferences develop through cultural prediction learning. A person raised in a culture with specific food predictions grows up predicting which flavors go together. The person from a different culture has different flavor predictions. The person from the first culture finds the second culture's food combinations unusual because the predictions differ. Humor relies on prediction violations. A joke works by establishing predictions about what the punchline will be and then violating those predictions. A person from a different culture might not understand the joke because the cultural predictions differ. A prediction violation that's funny in one culture might not be funny in another culture because the predictions are different. Cultural differences in time perception emerge from different predictions about time. A culture that values punctuality teaches predictions about timing. People in that culture develop accurate predictions about how long activities take. A culture that's more relaxed about time teaches different predictions. People in that culture develop different timing predictions. These aren't differences in how people perceive time. These are differences in how people predict timing. Prediction disorders occur when the brain's predictive systems malfunction. Schizophrenia appears to involve disrupted prediction error detection. People with schizophrenia have difficulty determining which perceptions are internally generated predictions versus external reality. The brain is making predictions but not correctly comparing them to actual input. The person experiences predictions as external voices or visions. The person can't distinguish between predicted and actual sensory input. It's as if the brain's mechanism for filtering out predictions has broken. Autism spectrum conditions appear to involve different predictive models. Some research suggests that people with autism have stronger predictions about physical systems, but weaker predictions about social systems. A person with autism might develop excellent predictions about how machinery works, but struggle with predicting what people will do. The difference isn't in prediction ability overall, but in which domains get strong predictive development. This explains why some autistic individuals show exceptional abilities in certain technical fields. Anxiety disorders appear to involve overly strong predictions about threat. An anxious person develops predictions that something bad will happen. The predictions are more confident than actual probability would warrant. The anxious person experiences the anxious prediction as very likely to occur. The brain is generating strong threat predictions even though objective threat is lower. The anxious person's body reacts to the threat prediction as if the threat were real. Depression appears to involve pessimistic predictions about the future. A depressed person develops predictions that efforts will fail and the situation won't improve. These negative predictions are so strong that the depressed person is discouraged from trying. The person's lack of effort then contributes to poor outcomes, confirming the predictions. The depressed person is caught in a loop where pessimistic predictions become self-fulfilling. Addiction involves disrupted reward prediction. An addicted person's brain develops strong predictions that the addictive substance will produce reward. These reward predictions are so strong that the addicted person is drawn toward the substance even when wanting to avoid it. The predictions override other values. ADHD appears to involve difficulties developing stable predictions. A person with ADHD has difficulty maintaining predictive focus. The person's attention shifts rapidly because predictions aren't stable. The person struggles to stay with a single predictive model. Dyslexia appears to involve difficulties developing predictions about letter and word sequences. A person with dyslexia struggles with reading because the predictive models for written language don't develop normally. The person can see the letters, but the predictions about what words they form are weak. Post-traumatic stress disorder involves rigid trauma-related predictions. A person with PTSD develops predictions about danger based on the trauma. The person's brain continually predicts that the trauma will happen again. These predictions are so strong that the person experiences constant threat. The predictions don't update even when safety is clearly present. These prediction disorders show that prediction is fundamental to mental health. When prediction goes wrong, experience suffers. Autism spectrum conditions involve distinctive patterns in how the brain develops predictions about different domains. Research suggests that autistic individuals may develop exceptionally strong predictions about physical systems while struggling with predictions about social behavior. A person with autism might spend years learning how complex machinery operates and develop predictions so precise that they can fix or rebuild systems that confuse most other people. The predictive models for physical systems become extraordinarily refined and detailed. But the same brain might struggle with predicting what another person is thinking based on facial expressions or body language. A social prediction that seems obvious to a neurotypical person remains opaque and confusing. The difference isn't intelligence or overall ability to predict. The difference is in which specific domains received the brain's focused development during critical periods. Early experiences shape which predictive systems become strong. An autistic child might spend more time observing physical systems than social interactions. This focuses development of predictive models toward physical and mechanical domains. As a result, the adult has expertise in mechanical prediction, but not social prediction. Some autistic individuals show remarkable abilities in visual prediction, music prediction, or mathematical prediction. They develop such strong predictive models in these domains that they achieve expert levels of performance that would take others many years to reach. The strength in prediction-based abilities in specific domains, combined with challenges in social prediction, helps explain the distinctive cognitive profile of autism. The brain that shows average social prediction might show exceptional musical prediction, or mathematical prediction, or visual pattern prediction. Some therapies for autism focus on building social predictive models explicitly. A person with autism can learn to recognize facial expressions and predict emotional states if taught the patterns systematically. What doesn't develop naturally through exposure can be learned through explicit instruction and practice. The person still may not develop intuitive social predictions the way neurotypical people do without conscious effort, but conscious application of learned patterns can improve social interaction over time. The key insight is that autism isn't a global deficit in prediction ability. It's a different distribution of predictive strengths and weaknesses across different domains. The brain that struggles with social prediction might predict physical behavior with extraordinary accuracy. Understanding autism as a prediction distribution problem rather than a global deficit problem opens new possibilities for support and intervention. Some autistic individuals actually report relief when they learn they have autism because it validates their experience. They finally understand why some things come naturally and other things seem impossibly confusing. Schizophrenia appears to involve a fundamental breakdown in the ability to distinguish between self-generated predictions and actual sensory input. The schizophrenic brain generates predictions constantly, like all brains do. But the filter that normally distinguishes between predicted sensation and actual sensation fails. The result is that the person experiences their own predictions as if they were external reality. A person with schizophrenia might experience their own internal predictions as external voices speaking to them. The brain is generating the prediction, but the person experiences it as coming from outside their mind. The prediction error detection system has failed catastrophically. Normally, when you predict what you'll see and then look at the world, the prediction matches and you experience it as seeing external reality. If a prediction doesn't match external input, you experience surprise and consciously notice the discrepancy. In schizophrenia, the brain generates strong predictions, but doesn't correctly compare them to actual sensory input. The prediction persists as conscious perception, even when it doesn't match external reality. This is why schizophrenic individuals often report that their thoughts are being broadcast to others, that external forces are controlling their behavior, or that their perceptions are being manipulated. These aren't hallucinations in the traditional sense, where the brain generates false sensory information. These are predictions that the brain is treating as actual reality. The person's brain is making predictions, and those predictions are being experienced as real external events. The person experiences their own imagination as actual perception. Research on schizophrenia increasingly focuses on prediction error detection as the key dysfunction. If the brain's error detection system can be improved, the person might better distinguish between prediction and reality. Some antipsychotic medications appear to work by altering how the brain processes prediction errors. The medications may enhance the brain's ability to recognize when a prediction doesn't match external input and suppress the false prediction. Understanding schizophrenia as a prediction error problem rather than a hallucination problem opens new treatment possibilities. The goal becomes not to prevent the brain from making predictions, because prediction is fundamental to all brain function and stopping prediction would destroy consciousness, but to improve the brain's ability to accurately compare predictions with actual reality. This represents a fundamental shift in how we understand and treat one of the most devastating mental illnesses. Future treatments might focus on strengthening the error detection systems rather than suppressing the prediction systems. Anxiety disorders emerge when the brain's prediction system becomes overly pessimistic about threat. An anxious person develops predictions that something bad will happen. The strength of these threat predictions far exceeds what objective probability would suggest. A person with social anxiety predicts catastrophic failure in social situations. The prediction is so strong and vivid that the anxious person is convinced disaster is imminent. The person's body reacts to the threat prediction by activating the stress response system. The heart rate increases, breathing becomes shallow, muscles tense. All of this happens because the brain has predicted a threat that may not actually materialize. The prediction itself creates the anxiety. Once the brain has made a strong threat prediction, the person becomes hypervigilant, scanning for evidence that confirms the prediction. The brain's selective attention system starts filtering for threat information. If the prediction was that social interaction will be embarrassing, the person becomes hypersensitive to any sign of social awkwardness. A moment of silence in conversation gets interpreted as judgment. A person looking at their phone gets interpreted as disinterest. The anxious person's brain is selectively sampling information that confirms the threat prediction. This creates a feedback loop where the prediction drives selective attention, which finds evidence for the prediction. The prediction becomes self-fulfilling, not because the predicted threat actually occurs, but because the anxious person behaves differently based on the prediction. A person convinced that they'll say something stupid becomes nervous, which makes them more likely to actually say something awkward because anxiety disrupts smooth speech. The prediction of failure led to anxious behavior, which led to actual poor performance. The anxious person's brain learns that the threat prediction was accurate. The prediction gets stronger. The pattern repeats and intensifies with each cycle. Treatment for anxiety often involves breaking this loop deliberately and systematically. Cognitive behavioral therapy helps anxious people recognize that their threat predictions are significantly overestimated. The person deliberately enters the situation they're anxious about and discovers that the prediction was wrong. The catastrophe doesn't happen. The prediction error updates the brain's model of threat. The threat prediction weakens gradually. As the person has more experiences where the predicted catastrophe doesn't occur, the brain's predictions become progressively more accurate and the anxiety diminishes substantially. The key is accumulating prediction errors in the direction of safety. Meditation appears to train the brain's prediction system in a specific way. During meditation, the person sits quietly and tries to focus attention on the present moment. As the mind wanders, the person notices and returns attention to the present. This simple practice has profound effects on how the brain generates predictions. When you're not actively predicting, you're vulnerable to your brain's background predictions. The brain is constantly generating predictions about what will happen next. Most of the time, you're not aware of this happening. Your attention is drawn to things that violate your predictions. You notice when something unexpected happens. During meditation, the person tries to simply observe experience without generating predictions. The person notices each breath, each sensation, without adding predictions about what will happen next. This is extraordinarily difficult because the brain has been optimized by evolution to predict. The brain resists the instruction not to predict. The brain wants to predict. Every few seconds, the mind wanders back into its habitual prediction-generating mode. The meditator notices this wandering and gently returns attention to the present moment. Over time, with consistent practice, something changes in how the brain functions. Background generation of constant predictions seems to quiet down and become less dominant. The person becomes less caught in the constant stream of prediction error corrections that normally drive consciousness. The person experiences less anxiety because anxiety is generated by threatening predictions about the future. The person experiences less rumination because rumination is generated by repetitive predictions about past failure and regret. The person experiences more peace because they're not constantly generating predictions and scanning for prediction violations. Research shows that meditation changes brain activity patterns in prediction-related regions significantly. The default mode network, which generates predictions when you're not focused on external tasks, shows markedly reduced activity in experienced meditators. The person's brain is literally making fewer background predictions during and after meditation. Studies show that anxiety and depression are strongly correlated with default mode network activity levels. More prediction activity in the default mode network correlates strongly with more anxiety and depression symptoms. Meditation seems to reduce this default mode prediction activity through repeated practice over time. The reduction in background predictions translates directly to reduction in anxiety and depression symptoms. Some researchers theorize that depression and anxiety are diseases of overactive prediction. The depressed brain predicts failure too strongly. The anxious brain predicts threat too strongly. The brain is caught in a loop of its own unhelpful predictions. Meditation helps by quieting the prediction system and breaking the loop. Regular meditation appears to literally rewire how the brain functions, making the person less vulnerable to the prediction traps that create mental illness. The brain learns to predict less and observe more. Virtual reality creates an unusual situation where the brain's predictions can be completely controlled and shaped by an external system. When wearing a VR headset, your brain receives sensory input that perfectly matches predictions generated by the VR program. Your brain predicts what will happen next based on your actions and the environment. The VR environment responds exactly as your brain predicted it should. If you reach out to touch a virtual object, the object appears precisely where your predictions said it would be. If you walk forward, the environment shifts exactly as your brain predicted. This is prediction heaven for the brain. Your predictions are always correct. The brain's prediction error is nearly zero. The accuracy is perfect. Researchers have discovered that this level of prediction accuracy has profound effects on psychology and emotion. When people spend extended time in VR, where their predictions are always correct, they experience reduced anxiety and increased confidence. The brain learns that its predictions work perfectly. If your predictions about what will happen are always correct, you feel safe and confident. The world makes sense. Everything you anticipate occurs. But VR also reveals something disturbing about how prediction errors shape emotion and behavior. When VR environments violate predictions in specific ways, people can develop phobias. A person can develop a fear of heights by spending time in a VR environment where they're standing on a high platform and the prediction violations create a sense of danger. The environment creates repeated prediction violations that the brain interprets as threat signals. The brain learns to predict danger in high places. After leaving VR, the person sometimes experiences real fear of heights. The brain has developed a new predictive model that treats heights as threatening. This shows how malleable and vulnerable prediction systems are. The brain's predictive models can be rapidly updated by repeated prediction violations, even if the violations are illusory. VR is being used therapeutically to help people overcome phobias by reversing this process. A person with a fear of heights spends time in VR environments where heights are presented in gradually increasing doses. The person's brain learns gradually that heights aren't actually dangerous. The prediction violations stop occurring because the predicted outcome finally matches reality. The prediction shifts from threat to safety. After many sessions in VR, the person can often handle real heights much better because the predictive models have been updated. VR is also being used to help people with social anxiety disorders. The person practices social interactions in VR where they can control the pace and difficulty of interactions. As the brain makes social predictions and those predictions turn out to be accurate in the VR environment, the person's anxiety diminishes. VR allows controlled prediction training, that would be difficult or impossible to implement in real life. Artificial intelligence systems, particularly deep learning networks, operate on principles remarkably similar to the brain's predictive processing. An AI trained to recognize objects in images is essentially building predictive models about what features indicate what objects. The AI generates predictions about what an image contains and updates its predictive models based on prediction errors. A deep learning network has many layers, much like the brain has hierarchical levels of processing. Lower layers make simple predictions about edges and textures. Higher layers make more complex predictions about objects and scenes. The lower layers generate predictions that feed backward to lower layers. This bidirectional prediction flow resembles how the brain's sensory cortex works. An AI trained to predict the next word in a sentence is essentially learning the same kind of predictive models that your brain uses when reading. The AI learns which words are likely to follow which other words. This allows the AI to predict upcoming words accurately. A person reading text uses similar predictive models. The reader predicts upcoming words and reads faster when predictions are accurate. Some researchers think that AI systems and brains are solving the same fundamental problem using different hardware. Both are trying to build models that predict future sensory input accurately. Both use prediction errors to update their models. Both show improved performance as they accumulate more predictio, ends and errors. The key difference is that the brain evolved over millions of years, while AI was designed and trained in months or years. The brain achieves prediction using neurons and chemical signals. AI achieves prediction using artificial neurons and mathematical computations. But the underlying logic is similar. AI systems show some of the same failure modes as brains. An AI trained on images of cats and dogs might make confident wrong predictions when shown a novel image. The AI might predict with high confidence that an image is a cat when it's actually a dog if the image has some unusual feature that the AI learned to associate with cats. This is similar to how a person's brain can make wrong predictions about a person's intentions based on limited information. Both AI and brains can have their predictions influenced by training data. If an AI is trained on images that contain certain biases, the AI will make biased predictions. If a person grows up in an environment that teaches biased predictions about groups of people, the person will make biased social predictions. Some researchers believe that understanding AI prediction failures might help us understand human prediction failures. If we can understand why an AI makes wrong predictions, we might understand why human brains make wrong predictions in similar situations. The parallel between AI and brain prediction systems is becoming increasingly clear as researchers study both systems. In fact, some neuroscientists now believe that understanding artificial neural networks might reveal how human neural networks actually work. The mathematics of prediction in AI might explain the mathematics of prediction in the brain. This exchange of understanding goes both ways. Understanding human brains might help us build better AI systems. Understanding AI might help us understand the brain better. This mutual illumination is one of the most exciting frontiers in science today. Future research on prediction will likely focus on how to improve predictive accuracy in specific domains and contexts where prediction matters most. Researchers are investigating whether specific training can enhance prediction abilities in athletes, anxious people, those with depression, and people learning new skills. An athlete might improve their sport performance through specific training that develops better predictions about opponent behavior or ball trajectory. Someone with anxiety might improve through training that develops more accurate threat predictions. Someone with depression might improve through training that develops less pessimistic outcome predictions about their future. A student learning mathematics might develop stronger mathematical intuition through training that improves predictions about which solution strategies will work for different problem types. Brain imaging studies are becoming more sophisticated at identifying exactly which neural regions contribute to specific predictions and how these regions communicate with each other. We can increasingly see in real time as predictions are being formed and errors are being corrected and fed back through the hierarchy. This detailed understanding of the brain's prediction architecture might allow targeted interventions for specific disorders. If we know exactly which regions malfunction in a specific disorder, we might be able to develop more targeted treatments that address the root cause. Future research may reveal how to enhance prediction accuracy without disrupting other cognitive functions that depend on the same neural machinery. Some enhancement might be possible through training and practice. Some enhancement might be possible through neuropharmacology that adjusts the neurochemical systems involved in prediction and error correction. Research on prediction also promised to improve artificial intelligence systems significantly. Understanding how human brains make predictions and learn from prediction errors might help design better artificial networks that learn more quickly and adapt more flexibly. If we can understand the algorithms that the brain uses for prediction, we might implement similar algorithms in AI systems. This bidirectional research between neuroscience and artificial intelligence is likely to accelerate dramatically as computational power increases and brain imaging technology improves. The goal is not to control the brain, but to understand it deeply enough that we can help it function better when it goes wrong. Knowledge of prediction might be the key to unlocking the mysteries of consciousness itself. In the moments before you consciously realize you've decided something, your brain has been preparing for hours, or sometimes even longer. This seems like an astonishing claim, but it's what the research shows with remarkable consistency. If a researcher monitors your brain activity while you're not aware of any decision process, the researcher can often predict what you're about to decide before you know yourself. The temporal gap between neural preparation and conscious awareness might be seconds in some cases, minutes in others, or even longer depending on the complexity of the decision. But there's almost always a gap. When you're driving home on a familiar route and suddenly realize you've missed your exit, your brain has been predicting the familiar route for miles. Your conscious attention was elsewhere, but your brain's predictions were guiding your hands and feet. When you walk into your home after work and immediately know something is different before you consciously identify what's different, your brain has been comparing the current environment to predictions of what home should look like. The mismatch captured your attention before you consciously identified the prediction violation. When you interact with someone familiar and somehow know before they say anything that they're upset, your brain is detecting subtle violations of predictions about how the person normally behaves. The person's facial expression, posture, or tone of voice is slightly different than predicted. Your brain detects the prediction violation and alerts you to something being wrong. You consciously perceive the upset expression after your brain has already detected that something is amiss. These moments are so common that you probably don't notice most of them. Your brain is constantly making and testing predictions without your conscious involvement. Your conscious awareness arrives after the brain has already initiated responses based on predictions. Your conscious mind then generates a narrative about why you did what you did. The narrative often feels like conscious decision-making when actually it's a post hoc story about decisions the brain made unconsciously. The driver didn't consciously decide to miss the exit. The brain made predictions about the familiar route, and the exit was missed before consciousness became involved. The driver's conscious mind then tells a story about being distracted or not paying attention. The narrative creates the sense that the conscious mind was in control and simply made a mistake. This disconnect between the conscious experience of decision-making and the actual neural process of decision-making is one of the most important discoveries of neuroscience. Consider another example. You're having a conversation with a friend, and midway through their sentence, you finish their thought. Your brain predicted where the sentence was going and completed it before they could. You experience this as an intuitive understanding of your friend. Actually, your brain made a prediction. The prediction turned out accurate, and your consciousness experienced the accuracy as understanding. If the prediction had been wrong and your friend said something completely different, you would have experienced surprise, and your consciousness would have noted that you misunderstood. Each of these moments reveals the hidden prediction system working beneath conscious awareness. Consider sitting at a dinner table. Before anyone speaks, you predict the tone of voice, the topic of conversation, the emotional state of the people around you, based on subtle cues. Your brain is making dozens of predictions per second. When someone laughs at a joke, you predicted that laughter was appropriate before you consciously registered the joke's punchline. Your laughter emerges from unconscious prediction, and then consciousness creates a narrative about why the joke was funny. When you taste food you've eaten many times, you predict the flavor before the food reaches your mouth. The prediction is based on visual cues and smell and memory. The actual taste is often barely registered because the prediction was accurate. Only when you taste something unexpected does consciousness fully engage with the taste experience. When you step outside and immediately know the temperature without thinking about it, your brain is making predictions about thermal sensations based on visual environmental cues. When you hear a familiar song and predict which note comes next, your brain has learned the patterns and predicts before the actual sound occurs. When you're typing and your fingers find the correct keys without conscious attention, your brain is predicting where the keys are, and your fingers move automatically. When you drive a familiar route and suddenly arrive at your destination without remembering the drive, your brain was making predictions about the route, and your conscious mind was free to think about other things. When you recognize a person's voice on the phone immediately, your brain predicted the identity based on the first few words. These everyday moments are constantly governed by prediction, and most of the time you're not aware of it happening. The philosophical implications of this understanding are profound and troubling. If the brain makes decisions before consciousness, then what is the nature of free will and personal responsibility? A decision that's unconsciously prepared and then consciously experienced feels like a free choice. You feel like you made the decision. You feel like you could have chosen differently. But if the brain's neural systems prepared the decision before you were conscious of it, was the choice actually free? Philosophers have debated free will for thousands of years without reaching consensus. Neuroscience is revealing that the question might be fundamentally misframed. Perhaps there is no single moment where free will occurs. Perhaps free will is not a binary yes or no, but a process that unfolds over time through the interaction of unconscious and conscious systems. Perhaps consciousness retains a kind of veto power over unconscious preparations. Even if the brain unconsciously prepares a decision, you might consciously reject it. The gap between neural preparation and conscious awareness might be the moment where free will occurs. You can't control the initial unconscious preparation, but you can use conscious thought to reconsider and potentially veto. This interpretation preserves some notion of free will while acknowledging the neural findings. Some philosophers argue that free will as traditionally conceived is impossible. If every decision is the result of prior brain states, and those states are determined by earlier states going back infinitely, then there's no point where genuine choice occurs. Every decision was determined by factors outside your control. This determinist view is consistent with the neural findings about unconscious decision preparation. The decisions are made by neural processes that you don't consciously control. The decisions feel free because consciousness is disconnected from the process, but they might not be free in the sense of being uncaused or undetermined. Yet consciousness seems deeply important for something, even if not for immediate action control. Consciousness allows you to reflect on your decisions after they've been made. Consciousness allows you to learn from prediction errors and update your predictive models for the future. Consciousness allows you to plan for distant futures and imagine possible outcomes. Consciousness allows you to consider abstract ethical principles. These functions matter enormously, even if consciousness doesn't control moment-to-moment behavior. Perhaps we've been asking the wrong question. Instead of asking whether consciousness controls behavior, we should ask what consciousness is for. The answer seems to be learning, planning, narrative construction, and ethical reasoning. These are valuable functions even if they don't involve moment-to-moment control. This reframing might help us move beyond the free will debate and toward a more nuanced understanding of how consciousness actually functions in human life. Understanding prediction might paradoxically increase rather than decrease human freedom by allowing us to recognize our automatic patterns and deliberately choose differently. Let your understanding of prediction settle into your bones now as evening falls and the world quiets around you. The brain that is reading these words has already predicted what the next words will be. Your brain has generated expectations about the direction this thought is moving. Most of your predictions have been accurate. A few have been surprising. Those surprise moments when a prediction was violated are the moments where your consciousness most fully engaged with the experience. The rest of the time, your brain was predicting smoothly, and your consciousness was simply narrating the experience, creating the story that makes it all coherent and meaningful. This understanding changes nothing about the fact that you are alive and experiencing the world. You still feel like you're making decisions. You still experience surprise when predictions are violated. You still learn and grow and adapt as you move through time. You still experience meaning and purpose. But now you understand something fundamental about how it all works. Your brain is a prediction machine, optimized by millions of years of evolution to anticipate what's coming next. Your consciousness emerges from that prediction system as a way of learning from prediction errors and constructing meaningful narratives about experience. You are the product of an ancient prediction system wearing a narrative shell. The prediction happens in darkness below the level of conscious awareness. The narration happens in the light of conscious thought. Both are necessary. Both are you. Your brain continues its work even now, predicting the sensations that will come next, anticipating your next thought, preparing your next action. Most of it happens without your awareness. This is not a diminishment of your capacity or your selfhood. This is how evolution solved the problem of survival in a complex world. It built machines that could predict and learn and adapt faster than conscious thought ever could. Then it wrapped those machines in consciousness to learn from mistakes and plan for distant futures. You are that unlikely combination. You are prediction and narration, unconscious process and conscious awareness, the brain and the mind working together in subtle, constant communication. As you rest, now let your mind quiet and let your brain do the predicting it has always done. The work continues in the darkness. The story will be there when you need it. Sleep well, knowing that your brain is still working, still predicting, still preparing for what comes next. You are safe. You are whole. You are the river and the narrator of the river's course.